The conference room fell silent when my daughter-in-law Jessica suggested I leave because the discussion was getting too technical for someone my age. I smiled politely and stayed exactly where I was. What she didn't know was that I had designed the entire organizational structure she was currently trying to dismantle. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The email from my son Marcus had arrived on a Tuesday morning, casual and brief in that way adult children communicate when they think they're being considerate of your time. Mom, Jessica wants to host a family dinner this weekend. She's excited to share some ideas about the company's future direction. Hope you can make it. The phrasing struck me as odd even then. Jessica had been married to my son for barely 8 months, and while she worked in middle management at Harrison Technologies, the company my late husband and I had built from nothing, she had no authority over future direction. That power rested with the board, of which I was still a member, though I had stepped back from day-to-day operations after Richard's death 3 years ago. I arrived at their downtown penthouse apartment at exactly 7 o'clock on Saturday evening, carrying a bottle of wine from Richard's collection, and wearing the understated elegance that had become my signature over decades of business dinners. The doorman recognized me immediately, greeting me with the warmth reserved for building residents rather than guests, which told me Marcus and Jessica had been living here longer than the 6 months since their wedding. Interesting. My son had told me they had just moved in 2 months ago. Jessica answered the door in a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her perfectly highlighted hair styled in a way that suggested a professional blowout earlier that day. Behind her, the apartment gleamed with the kind of calculated perfection you see in magazine spreads, every surface carefully curated to project success and sophistication. It was beautiful in an impersonal way, like a hotel lobby. "Margaret," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek in that affected manner some young women adopt when they want to seem cosmopolitan. "So glad you could make it. Marcus is just finishing up a call with Tokyo. Work never stops, you know how it is." Actually, I did know. I had taken calls with Tokyo at 3 in the morning, while simultaneously managing factory delays in Germany and distribution problems in Brazil. But I simply smiled and handed her the wine, watching as she glanced at the label with the faint confusion of someone who recognized it was expensive but didn't quite understand why. The apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city skyline, the same view I had once enjoyed from the corner office on the 47th floor of the Harrison Technologies building. That office now belonged to James Chan, the CEO I had personally recruited and mentored to take over leadership when Richard's illness made it clear we needed succession planning. James was brilliant, diplomatic, and most importantly, understood the company's core values. Or at least I had thought he did. Marcus emerged from his home office, loosening his tie with one hand while holding his phone with the other. "Mom," he said, wrapping me in a genuine hug that reminded me of the boy he had once been, before business school and marriage had layered on these additional personas. "Sorry about that. The merger talks are heating up." I stiffened slightly, though I kept my expression neutral. Merger talks? This was the first I had heard of any merger, and as a board member, I should have been informed immediately of any such discussions. "What merger is this?" Jessica laughed, a tinkling sound that managed to be both musical and condescending. "Oh, Margaret, we probably shouldn't bore you with all the corporate details. I know you've been enjoying your retirement." She emphasized the word retirement in a way that made it sound like a gentle decline into irrelevance, rather than a well-earned rest after 40 years of building an empire. "I'm still on the board," I reminded her mildly, accepting the glass of wine Marcus poured for me. "I'd be very interested to hear about any merger discussions." An almost imperceptible glance passed between my son and his wife, the kind of silent communication that develops between couples, but that can also signal conspiracy. Marcus cleared his throat, suddenly focused on the cheese board Jessica had artfully arranged on the marble counter. "It's very preliminary," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Nothing official yet. Just some exploratory conversations with Titanium Solutions about potential synergies." Titanium Solutions. The name hit me like cold water. I knew that company well. They were notorious in the industry for aggressive acquisitions followed by brutal restructuring that typically resulted in mass layoffs, gutted research and development departments, and the eventual dissolution of everything that had made the acquired companies valuable in the first place. They were corporate raiders dressed up in the language of innovation and efficiency. That's an interesting choice, I said carefully, taking a small sip of wine. What's driving the interest in partnering with them? Jessica settled onto the pristine white sofa, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. The industry is changing so rapidly, Margaret. Companies that don't adapt get left behind. Titanium has incredible resources and reach. They could take Harrison Technologies to levels you and Richard never imagined. The casual dismissal of 4 decades of work, delivered with a smile and a tone that suggested she was explaining something simple to someone slow to understand, took considerable effort to absorb without reaction. I had learned long ago, in boardrooms filled with men who underestimated me, that the most powerful response was often no visible response at all. What level specifically? I asked, settling into the chair across from them. Jessica leaned forward, warming to her topic with the enthusiasm of someone who had rehearsed this presentation. Global expansion, aggressive market penetration, streamlined operations. Harrison Technologies has been operating the same way for decades. It's comfortable, sure, but comfort is the enemy of growth. We need to be willing to make hard choices, to cut away the dead weight and focus on what's really profitable. The dead weight? I wondered if she had any idea how many families depended on Harrison Technologies for their livelihoods, how many of our employees had been with us for 20 or 30 years, had sent their children to college on Harrison salaries, had built their lives around the stability we offered. That stability wasn't dead weight. It was the foundation of our culture, and the reason our turnover rate was the lowest in the industry. And what does James think of these exploratory conversations? I asked, referring to our CEO. Another glance between them, this one lasting a fraction longer. James is very focused on the day-to-day operations, Marcus said slowly. Strategic vision requires looking beyond the daily details. So he doesn't know, I clarified. We're building consensus before bringing it to the full leadership team. Jessica said smoothly. That's just good change management. You don't want to alarm people before you have a clear plan in place. I took another sip of wine, using the moment to study my daughter-in-law more carefully. She had joined Harrison Technologies 2 years ago, hired into a mid-level position in our marketing department. Her resume had been impressive on paper, degrees from prestigious universities, a stint at a consulting firm, the right buzzwords scattered throughout her application. The hiring manager had been enthusiastic about her potential to bring fresh perspectives to a company he felt was perhaps too conservative in its approach. What I hadn't known at the time, because I was already stepping back from daily involvement as Richard's health declined, was that Jessica had targeted our company specifically. I learned this later, pieced together from casual comments and observations that only made sense in retrospect. She had researched Harrison Technologies thoroughly, identified it as a family-owned company with significant value, and, in her assessment, outdated leadership. She had identified my son Marcus, who worked in our business development division, as her entry point. I couldn't fault her ambition entirely. Ambition had driven Richard and me when we started Harrison Technologies in our garage 42 years ago, when we maxed out our credit cards to buy our first manufacturing equipment, when we worked 18-hour days to fill orders we weren't entirely sure we could fulfill. But our ambition had been coupled with a genuine desire to build something lasting, to create not just wealth but opportunity for others. Jessica's ambition seemed to be purely acquisitive, focused on extraction rather than creation. Dinner was an elaborate affair, catered by one of the city's trendy restaurants, each course precisely plated and presented. Jessica dominated the conversation, sharing stories from her consulting days, dropping names of executives and companies with the casual presumption that everyone would be impressed. Marcus mostly listened, occasionally adding supporting details, playing the role of proud husband. I observed more than I participated, asking occasional questions that Jessica seemed to interpret as the polite interest of someone who didn't quite grasp the sophisticated concepts being discussed. She explained market disruption to me, as if I hadn't navigated 3 major industry transformations. She outlined the importance of shareholder value, as if Richard and I hadn't built a company that had made millionaires of our earliest investors, while also providing profit sharing to every employee. After dessert, as we moved back to the living room for coffee, Jessica's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, smiled, and excused herself to take the call in the other room. Marcus and I sat in silence for a moment, The kind of loaded quiet that accumulates when there are things that need to be said but neither party wants to begin. Mom, he started, then stopped, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that reminded me so much of Richard it made my chest ache. You can just ask me whatever you want to ask, I said gently. He looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time all evening with something approaching his natural self rather than the corporate persona he had been wearing. Do you ever regret stepping back? From the company, I mean. Don't you miss being in the center of everything? I considered the question carefully. It deserved honesty. Sometimes I admitted, particularly when I read about changes being implemented that I know will cause problems down the line. But Richard and I always intended to transition leadership eventually. We wanted Harrison Technologies to outlive us, to become something bigger than just our personal project. But you still care about what happens to it, he pressed.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Of course. I poured myself more coffee, noting that Jessica's phone call was extending well beyond what politeness would typically allow. Marcus, can I ask you something directly? He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Is this merger idea coming from you, or from Jessica? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. It's complicated, Mom. The industry really is changing. Our growth has been flat for 3 years. The board has been asking questions about long-term strategy. All of that was true. What he wasn't saying was equally important. Has Jessica been in contact with people at Titanium Solutions? His hesitation was answer enough, but he eventually nodded. She has a former colleague there. He reached out to her about potential opportunities. At first it was just informal networking, but then the conversations got more serious. And they approached her, not the other way around, I clarified. Yes. Why does that matter? Because it means they identified Harrison Technologies as a target and used Jessica's position as an access point. I kept my voice level, not accusatory. It's a common tactic, Marcus. Find someone inside the company who's ambitious, dissatisfied, or both. Cultivate that relationship. Plant seeds about how much better things could be under different ownership. Before you know it, they have an advocate inside the target company pushing their agenda. My son's face had gone pale. You think Jessica is working with them? Like deliberately? I think Jessica is ambitious and perhaps doesn't fully understand the implications of what she's advancing. I reached over and took his hand, something I hadn't done since he was a child. But I also think you need to be very careful about who's shaping your perspective on the company's future. Jessica returned then, her expression bright and energized. Sorry about that. Important call I couldn't miss. She settled back onto the sofa, tucking her legs beneath her. Actually, perfect timing. I've been wanting to discuss something with you, Margaret. I waited, maintaining my pleasant, slightly vague expression. Marcus and I have been thinking about the upcoming board meeting. There's going to be a proposal to bring in some outside consultants to do a comprehensive review of company operations and structure. We think it would be really valuable to get an objective perspective on where we could improve efficiency. Outside consultants who just happen to have connections to Titanium Solutions? I asked mildly. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. They're the best in the business. But that's exactly the kind of resistance to outside input that's been holding the company back. No offense, Margaret, but the world has changed a lot since you and Richard started out. What worked in the 80s doesn't work now. Some principles are timeless, I replied. Employee loyalty. Quality over quarterly profits. Building trust with clients over decades rather than extracting maximum value in the short term. Those are lovely ideals, Jessica said, her tone suggesting she thought them quaint and outdated. But ideals don't keep a company competitive in a global market. Sometimes you have to make tough choices. Sometimes you have to accept that the way things have always been done isn't the way they should continue to be done. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. Jessica, how much do you know about Harrison Technologies' founding? She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. I know the basic story. You and Richard started it in your garage, built it up over the years. Very impressive, especially for your generation. What specific challenges did we face in the early years? I pressed. She waved a hand vaguely. The usual startup struggles, I imagine. Funding, competition, getting customers to take you seriously. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, perhaps sensing where this was headed. In our second year, I said conversationally, we had a choice to make. We had developed a manufacturing process that was more efficient than anything else on the market. A larger company approached us with an acquisition offer. They promised to scale our innovation to take it global, to make us both wealthy beyond what we could achieve on our own. I paused, letting the parallel settle into the room. Richard and I seriously considered it. We were exhausted, overwhelmed, unsure if we could sustain the growth we were experiencing. The offer was generous. It would have solved all our immediate problems. What happened? Marcus asked, though I suspected he already knew the story. We did our research. We talked to people at other companies that firm had acquired. We discovered that their pattern was to buy innovative companies, extract the intellectual property, lay off most of the staff, and eventually fold the acquired company into their larger corporate structure where the innovation that made it special got diluted and lost. So we turned them down. That was a different era, Jessica interjected. And clearly things worked out for you. But maybe if you had taken that deal, the technology would have reached more people faster. Maybe the net positive would have been greater. Maybe. I held her gaze steadily. Or maybe Harrison Technologies would have become a footnote, and the 3,000 people who currently work for us would have had very different, possibly much harder lives. We'll never know because we chose to build something lasting rather than something immediately profitable. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the carefully curated space closing in with the weight of competing visions for the future. Jessica's expression had hardened, the social polish cracking to reveal something sharper underneath. With all due respect, Margaret, she said, and I braced myself because nothing good ever follows that phrase. Your attachment to the past is exactly what's preventing this company from reaching its full potential. The world doesn't reward sentimentality. It rewards results. We have results, I pointed out. Consistent profitability for 4 decades. Industry-leading retention rates. Innovation that's generated 47 patents. A reputation that has clients seeking us out rather than us having to chase them. Consistency isn't growth, she countered. And retention means you're carrying people who should probably have been let go years ago. As for reputation, that's just another word for complacency. Clients come to you because they know you won't challenge them, won't push them to think differently. The analysis was so fundamentally wrong, so detached from the reality of our business, that I almost laughed. But I maintained my composure, filing away this revelation of how little Jessica actually understood about the company she was so eager to reshape. I should probably get going, I said, rising from my chair. Thank you for dinner. It's been very enlightening. Marcus stood quickly, concern evident on his face. Mom, I'll walk you down. In the elevator, my son stared at the descending floor numbers, his jaw tight. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She can be a bit intense about work stuff. She's ambitious, I replied neutrally. There's nothing wrong with that. But she's wrong, isn't she? About the company, about the merger, about all of it. I looked at my son, this man I had raised, who had grown up watching his parents build something meaningful, who had chosen to join that legacy but seemed uncertain now about what that legacy actually meant. That's something you need to decide for yourself, Marcus. You're a board member too. You have a voice in these decisions. The question is whether you're going to use that voice to echo what others tell you to say, or whether you're going to speak from your own understanding and values. The elevator reached the lobby. Marcus hugged me, holding on a moment longer than usual. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. And I trust you to do the right thing, even when it's hard. As I drove home through the city streets, I reflected on the evening's revelations. Jessica's agenda was clear now. She was positioning herself as a change agent, building a case for dramatic transformation that would likely involve selling Harrison Technologies to Titanium Solutions. She had recruited my son, whether consciously or not, to her cause. And she was counting on my status as a retired grandmother to neutralize any opposition I might present. What Jessica couldn't know because she had never bothered to look beyond the surface, was that I hadn't truly retired. I had transitioned, stepped back from operational leadership while maintaining my board seat and my relationships with every key stakeholder in the company. I had spent the last 3 years mentoring the next generation of leaders, strengthening relationships with our longest-standing clients, and quietly ensuring that Harrison Technologies' values were embedded deeply enough to survive leadership transitions. I had also, though few people knew this, maintained a network of contacts throughout the industry. former employees who had moved to competitors, suppliers who worked with multiple companies, industry analysts who tracked trends and movements. If Titanium Solutions was planning something, I would hear about it. When I arrived home, I poured myself a small glass of Richard's favorite scotch and sat in his study, surrounded by the books and papers that had filled his life. I missed him desperately in moments like this. He would have known exactly how to handle Jessica, how to protect our legacy without alienating our son. But Richard wasn't here, and the responsibility fell to me. I had built this company through years of hard work, strategic thinking, and the ability to anticipate problems before they became crises. Jessica thought she was dealing with an aging grandmother who could be sidelined with condescending smiles and vague reassurances. She was about to discover that the woman who had built Harrison Technologies from nothing was far from finished. And unlike Jessica, I didn't need to make aggressive moves or loud pronouncements. I had something much more powerful. I had built the entire structure she was trying to dismantle, and I knew exactly where all the critical supports were located. The board meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks away. That gave me time to make some calls, have some conversations, and remind certain people of truths they seemed to have forgotten. Harrison Technologies wasn't just a company. It was a legacy, a commitment, a promise to thousands of people whose lives were intertwined with its success. I wasn't going to let it be destroyed by someone who saw it as nothing more than a transaction. The next morning I began making calls. My first was to James Chun, our CEO, who answered on the second ring despite the early hour. "Margaret," he said warmly. "This is a pleasant surprise. How are you?" "I'm well, James. Do you have a few minutes to talk about something important?" "For you?" "Always." His tone shifted, becoming more alert. "What's going on?" "I need to know if you're aware of any discussions about a potential merger with Titanium Solutions." The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "That's the first I'm hearing of it," he said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Who's been having these discussions?" I explained what I had learned at dinner, watching through my window as the morning sun illuminated my garden. James listened without interrupting, and I could almost hear his mind working through the implications. "This explains some things," he said when I finished. "Jessica has been asking unusual questions lately, requesting access to information that's outside her department's scope. I thought she was just being overly enthusiastic about understanding the broader business. Now I'm wondering if she was gathering intelligence. For Titanium," I confirmed. "James, I need you to do something for me. I need you to schedule one-on-one meetings with each board member before the meeting. Casual coffee or lunch, nothing that seems like formal lobbying. Just touch base, get a sense of where everyone's thinking is on the company's direction. You want to know who else might be sympathetic to a merger." He understood immediately. "And I want you to remind them subtly of what makes Harrison Technologies special. Our culture, our values, our track record. Don't make it political. Just make sure they remember what they'd be giving up. Consider it done." He paused. "Margaret, I want you to know that I would never support a sale to Titanium. This company means too much to me, to all of us who've built our careers here. Whatever you need from me, you have it." After hanging up with James, I called Patricia Hendricks, our chief financial officer and one of my oldest friends in the business. Patricia had started as an accountant when Harrison Technologies was just 15 people working out of a converted warehouse. She knew where every dollar had come from and where every investment had gone. "Let me guess," Patricia said after I outlined the situation. "Jessica wants to bring in consultants who will produce a report showing we're inefficient, underleveraged, and ripe for acquisition. Then she'll present that report to the board as objective evidence that we need to sell." "That would be my guess," I agreed. "Can you prepare an alternative analysis? Something that shows our actual financial health, our growth trajectory, our comparative performance against industry standards?" "I can do better than that." Patricia's voice took on a hard edge. "I can show exactly what would happen to our employees, our benefits programs, our R&D investments if Titanium takes over. They have a track record, Margaret. It's public information. I can model what their typical acquisition pattern would mean for Harrison Technologies." "Perfect. And Patricia? Keep this quiet for now. I don't want Jessica to know we're preparing a defense." My next call was to Bernard Whitmore, the venture capitalist who had been our first major investor 38 years ago. Bernard was in his 80s now, retired from active investing, But he still maintained his board seat and had strong opinions about corporate governance. "Margaret Hartley," he said with genuine pleasure when he heard my voice, "I was just thinking about you, wondering if you were going to let your daughter-in-law run roughshod over everything you built." "So you've heard," I said, not entirely surprised. Bernard had always had an impressive intelligence network. "Not officially, but I have lunch regularly with some folks at Titanium's investment bank. They've been unusually interested in our industry sector lately, asking questions about which companies might be open to acquisition. When they specifically mentioned Harrison Technologies, I started paying attention." "What else have you heard?" "That they've been working on this for about 6 months. They have someone inside feeding them information." "I'm guessing that's your new daughter-in-law." "That's my assessment as well." "Bernard, I need your voice at the board meeting. You have credibility with the other investors. If you speak against this merger, they'll listen. You have it." He paused, and I heard the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "You know what I admire most about you, Margaret? You never ask for help unless you truly need it. And when you do ask, you've already done most of the work yourself. What do you need me to do?" "Just be ready to remind the board why they invested in Harrison Technologies in the first place. Remind them of what we promised and how we've delivered on those promises. Consider it done. And Margaret, don't let them make you feel like you're being sentimental or outdated. The values you and Richard built this company on aren't old-fashioned. They're just unfashionable with a certain type of MBA who thinks everything can be optimized on a spreadsheet." After finishing my calls, I spent the afternoon in Richard's study, reviewing years of company documents, financial reports, and strategic plans. I needed to remember every detail, every decision point, every challenge we had overcome. Jessica thought she understood this company because she had read some reports and sat through some meetings. I had lived this company. I had bled for it, sacrificed for it, shaped it with my own hands. That evening Marcus called. "Mom, we need to talk. Can I come by?" "Of course," I said, hearing the strain in his voice. He arrived an hour later, still in his work clothes, his tie loosened and his expression troubled. We sat in the kitchen, the room where I had always had my most important conversations, first with Richard and now with our son. "Jessica is furious," Marcus said without preamble. "She knows you called James and Patricia. She's saying you're undermining her, that you can't let go of control, that you're putting your ego ahead of what's best for the company." I poured us both tea, taking my time with the ritual. "What do you think, Marcus? Do you think I'm being selfish?" He ran his hands over his face, exhausted. "I don't know what to think. Jessica makes good points about growth and adaptation. But when I'm honest with myself, I remember working at the company during summer breaks, seeing how people actually cared about each other, how it felt like a community and not just a workplace. I don't want to lose that." "Then don't," I said simply. "You have a voice in this, Marcus. You're not just Jessica's husband. You're Richard Hartley's son. And you're a board member with fiduciary responsibility to all stakeholders, not just shareholders." "She says you're manipulating me," he said quietly, "using sentiment and emotion instead of hard business logic." "And what does your hard business logic tell you?" I asked. "Forget emotion for a moment. Look at the data. Look at Titanium's track record with acquisitions. Look at what happens to companies they absorb. Is that what you want for Harrison Technologies?" "No," he admitted. "But I also don't want to be the reason we miss an opportunity because I was too attached to the way things have always been." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Marcus, there's a difference between being attached to the past and being committed to values. Harrison Technologies has always balanced profitability with responsibility. We've grown steadily while maintaining our culture. That's not being stuck in the past. That's being intentional about the future we're building." He nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "What should I do?" I smiled. "Whatever you believe is right. But I'd suggest doing your own research. Talk to people at companies Titanium has acquired. Look at their employment numbers before and after acquisition. Read the case studies. Make your decision based on evidence, not on anyone's argument, including mine." After Marcus left, I felt the weight of the coming battle settling over me. This wasn't just about business strategy or corporate governance. This was about legacy, about meaning, about whether the work of a lifetime could be preserved or would be dismantled by people who saw only financial instruments where Richard and I had seen human potential. I walked through my house, touching the photos on the walls. Richard accepting an award for workplace excellence. Our employees at the annual company picnic. Families playing together on the lawn. The ribbon-cutting ceremony when we opened our research facility. The retirement party for our first employee, who had spent 40 years with us. These weren't just memories. They were evidence of what was possible when you built a company based on something more than extraction and optimization. They were proof that business could be a force for good, creating value not just for shareholders but for everyone it touched. Jessica saw Harrison Technologies as an asset to be monetized. I saw it as a promise to be kept, and I was going to fight with everything I had to make sure that promise wasn't broken by someone who had never understood what it meant in the first place. The real battle was just beginning, but I was ready. I had built this company once from nothing. If necessary, I would fight just as hard to save it from those who would destroy it for profit. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon in the executive conference room on the 47th floor. I arrived 30 minutes early, something I had always done throughout my career, believing that controlling the space before others arrived gave a subtle psychological advantage. The room hadn't changed much since my active leadership days. The same mahogany table that could seat 20, the same view of the city stretching to the horizon, the same photographs on the walls documenting the company's history. I stood before one particular photograph, taken in 1987, showing Richard and me cutting the ribbon at our first major manufacturing facility. We looked so young in that image, filled with the kind of optimism that comes from not yet knowing how hard the journey would be. Behind us in the photo stood 15 employees, everyone we had at the time, all of them believing in a vision that was still more hope than reality. The door opened and James Chan entered, carrying a leather portfolio. He stopped when he saw me, offering a slight smile. I had a feeling I'd find you here early. Old habits, I replied. How did your conversations go? He moved to stand beside me, both of us looking at the photograph. Enlightening. I met with all 9 board members individually. 5 are solidly opposed to any merger talk. 2 are on the fence, wanting to hear more details. And 2 are clearly sympathetic to Jessica's perspective. Let me guess, I said. David Morrison and Linda Zhao are the sympathetic ones. James nodded. Morrison has always been primarily focused on share price. And Zhao has been frustrated with what she perceives as our slow adaptation to market changes. Jessica has been cultivating both of them for months. And the ones on the fence? Robert Palmer and Susan Chan, no relation to me. Both are newer to the board, brought on in the last 2 years. They don't have the historical context, so they're genuinely open to hearing arguments from both sides. Which means this meeting is going to come down to who makes the more compelling case, I observed. And who reveals what information when, James added. He turned to face me directly. Margaret, I need to tell you something. Jessica submitted a formal proposal to me yesterday afternoon. She wants to present it to the board today. That's highly irregular. Proposals are supposed to be circulated in advance. She's claiming it's preliminary, just opening a conversation. But the document is 30 pages long and clearly took weeks to prepare. It's not preliminary at all. What does it contain? A full analysis of why Harrison Technologies should pursue acquisition by Titanium Solutions, complete with financial projections, market analysis, and a transition timeline. It's professionally done, which means she had help preparing it, probably from Titanium's team. I absorbed this information, adjusting my strategy. She's moving faster than I expected. That suggests either confidence or desperation. Or both, James suggested. She knows you're mobilizing opposition. She's trying to seize the initiative before you can fully counter her narrative. Then we need to be ready. Did Patricia finish her analysis? Completed last night. It's devastating to Jessica's argument. Patricia pulled data on every titanium acquisition in the last decade. The pattern is consistent and brutal. Average reduction of 70% in workforce within 18 months. Complete elimination of research and development budgets. Absorption of intellectual property followed by dissolution of the acquired company's brand within 3 years. Good. Make sure every board member has a copy before the meeting starts. Other board members began arriving, exchanging pleasantries and settling into their customary seats. I noticed Jessica arrive with Marcus, both dressed in sharp business attire. Jessica's expression was confident, almost triumphant. She had a leather presentation folder that matched James's, clearly containing her proposal. She took a seat near the head of the table, positioning herself as a central figure rather than the mid-level employee she actually was. Marcus caught my eye across the table, offering a small, uncertain smile. I returned it, hoping he had done the homework I suggested and was prepared to make his own informed decision. At precisely 2 o'clock, Bernard Whitmore, as the longest-serving board member and chairman, called the meeting to order. Before we begin with the formal agenda, he said in his distinctive gravelly voice, I understand there's a special presentation that's been requested. Jessica, I believe you have something to share with us? Jessica stood, smoothing her suit jacket with a practiced gesture. Thank you, Bernard. And thank you all for your time today. I know you're all busy, so I'll be direct. She activated the presentation screen, and a polished title slide appeared reading Harrison Technologies, a strategic vision for transformative growth. I've been with this company for 2 years now, she began, and in that time I've had the opportunity to observe both our strengths and our challenges. We're a company with incredible heritage, strong relationships, and a reputation for quality. But heritage alone doesn't sustain a business in today's market. We need to be willing to evolve, to make bold moves, to partner with organizations that can take us to the next level. She advanced to the next slide, showing a graph of the company's revenue growth over the past 5 years. As you can see, our growth has plateaued. We're holding steady, which sounds fine until you compare us to industry leaders who are expanding at 2 or 3 times our rate. We're not losing ground, but we're not gaining it either. And in a competitive market, standing still is the same as moving backward. The presentation was slick and professional, exactly the kind of narrative that could sway board members who cared primarily about financial performance. Jessica moved through slides showing market opportunities we were supposedly missing, efficiency improvements that could be realized through consolidation, and the resources that a larger parent company could provide. Then she got to the core of her proposal. Titanium Solutions has expressed serious interest in acquiring Harrison Technologies. She let that statement hang in the air for a moment. They see what we could become with the right resources and strategic direction. They're prepared to offer a premium valuation, providing excellent returns for our shareholders, while also creating opportunities for expansion that we simply can't achieve on our own. What kind of premium are we talking about? David Morrison asked, leaning forward with obvious interest. Their preliminary indication suggests a valuation 30 to 40% above our current share price. Jessica replied smoothly. That translates to substantial returns for everyone in this room. And what would happen to our employees? This question came from Patricia Hendricks, her tone carefully neutral. Jessica didn't hesitate. There would naturally be some restructuring to eliminate redundancies and improve efficiency. That's standard in any merger. But the goal would be to position the company for long-term success, which ultimately benefits everyone. The phrasing was careful, designed to sound reasonable while obscuring the reality of what restructuring meant. I waited, letting Jessica complete her presentation before speaking. She spent another 15 minutes walking through financial projections, all of them based on optimistic assumptions about synergies and market opportunities. When she finished, Bernard thanked her and asked if there were questions. Several board members had technical questions about valuation methods and timeline. Jessica fielded them competently, clearly well rehearsed. Then Bernard turned to me. Margaret, you've been quiet. I suspect you have thoughts on this proposal. I stood, moving to the front of the room where Jessica had just been standing. She returned to her seat, her expression confident, perhaps even slightly smug. She thought she had won the room. Thank you, Bernard. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. I appreciate Jessica's thorough presentation. She's clearly put significant work into making a case for this merger. However, I'd like to provide some additional context that I think is essential for this board to consider before making any decisions. I nodded to James, who began distributing Patricia's analysis. While you're receiving those documents, let me share some history. In 1989, Richard and I faced a situation remarkably similar to what Jessica is proposing today. We had built Harrison Technologies to a certain level of success, but we were exhausted and uncertain about our ability to scale further. A large corporation approached us with an acquisition offer that seemed attractive on paper. I paused, letting them absorb the parallel, We seriously considered it. The money was good. The promises were compelling. But we did our research. We talked to founders of other companies that firm had acquired. And we discovered that within 2 years, most of those companies had been essentially dismantled. The founders were bought out and sidelined. The employees were laid off in waves. The innovation that made those companies attractive in the first place was absorbed and diluted until nothing distinctive remained. I could see several board members nodding, remembering stories they had heard over the years. So we made a different choice. We decided to grow organically, to stay independent, to build something that would last beyond our lifetimes. It was harder, took longer, but look at what we created. I gestured to the windows overlooking our manufacturing facilities visible in the distance. 3,000 employees, many of whom have been with us for decades. 47 patents that have generated innovations used across our industry. A reputation that brings clients to us rather than forcing us to chase them. Financial stability that has survived multiple economic downturns. That's what we built by choosing the harder path. Jessica shifted in her seat, clearly preparing to counter my narrative. But I wasn't finished. Now let's talk specifically about titanium solutions, since they're the suitor being proposed. Patricia, would you walk us through what you found? Patricia stood, her expression grim. I analyzed 10 companies that Titanium Solutions has acquired in the last decade. The pattern is remarkably consistent. She opened to a page in the document she had distributed. Within 18 months of acquisition, the average workforce reduction is 71%. Research and development budgets are eliminated entirely within the first year. The acquired company's brand is phased out within 3 years, absorbed into Titanium's corporate structure. She looked directly at Jessica. You mentioned that restructuring would eliminate redundancies. Based on Titanium's track record, that restructuring would mean eliminating roughly 2,000 of our 3,000 jobs. The research division that currently employs 200 engineers would cease to exist. The collaborative culture that gives us our competitive advantage would be dismantled in favor of Titanium's hierarchical corporate model. That's a very negative interpretation, Jessica interjected. Every acquisition is different. The circumstances vary. Patricia didn't back down. I'm not interpreting. I'm reporting data. These numbers come from public filings, employment records, and industry analysis. The pattern isn't speculation. It's Titanium's demonstrated operating model. Bernard cleared his throat. Jessica, did you research Titanium's acquisition history before proposing this merger? I knew they had a reputation for aggressive restructuring, Jessica admitted. But that's often necessary to achieve the efficiencies that make acquisitions successful. Efficient for whom? This came from Linda Zhao, one of the board members James had identified as sympathetic to Jessica's perspective. I'm all for improving our competitive position, but not if it means destroying what makes this company valuable in the first place. I seized on the opening. That's exactly the question we need to ask ourselves. What makes Harrison Technologies valuable? Is it just our revenue and profit margins, which any competent management team could potentially optimize? Or is it something more fundamental? I advanced to a slide I had prepared showing employee retention statistics. Our average employee tenure is 12 years, triple the industry average. Our employee satisfaction scores consistently rank in the top 5% of manufacturing companies. Our safety record is exemplary. Our community investment programs have contributed $20 million to local education and infrastructure over the past decade. These aren't soft metrics that don't matter to business success. They're the foundation of our competitive advantage. Clients choose us because they know our experienced workforce delivers quality. Employees stay with us because we invest in their development and treat them as partners rather than resources. Innovation happens here because people feel secure enough to take intellectual risks. I looked directly at Jessica. If we sell to Titanium Solutions, all of that disappears. The culture that took 4 decades to build will be dismantled in 18 months. The employees who trusted us to steward this company responsibly will be laid off. The community relationships we've nurtured will be abandoned. And for what? So shareholders can realize a 30% premium on their investment? David Morrison spoke up, his tone defensive. With respect, Margaret, a 30% return is significant. Our fiduciary duty is to shareholders. If there's an opportunity to maximize their value, don't we have an obligation to pursue it? Our fiduciary duty is to all stakeholders, I corrected. Shareholders, yes, but also employees, clients, and the communities we operate in. Richard and I structured this company specifically to balance those obligations. We're privately held for a reason. We're not subject to the quarterly earnings pressures that force public companies into short-term thinking. Bernard nodded thoughtfully. Margaret raises an important point. We have the luxury of taking a long-term view precisely because we're not beholden to public market expectations. Why would we voluntarily surrender that advantage? Because long-term thinking doesn't mean refusing to adapt, Jessica argued, her composure slipping slightly. The market is changing. Our competitors are consolidating. If we don't make a strategic move now, we risk being left behind and eventually failing anyway. At least this way, we'd be making the choice from a position of strength. What competitors are consolidating? James asked, his tone. Actually, the trend is more nuanced, I interjected. Yes, some companies are consolidating. Those are typically companies that were struggling, that had lost their competitive edge, that needed the resources of a larger parent to survive. But the successful companies in our sector, the ones with strong cultures and clear identities, are remaining independent. They're growing through strategic partnerships, not through surrendering their autonomy. I could see the momentum shifting in the room. The board members who had been on the fence were looking at Jessica with new skepticism. Even David Morrison seemed less certain of his position. But I needed to close the argument decisively. There's one more thing this board needs to know. I looked directly at Jessica. How long have you been in contact with representatives from Titanium Solutions? Jessica's face went pale. That's not relevant to evaluating the merits of the proposal. I disagree. I think it's extremely relevant. Bernard, James, board members, I've learned that Jessica has been in communication with Titanium for approximately 6 months. These aren't preliminary conversations that happened recently. This is a coordinated effort that began long before today's presentation. That's not true, Jessica protested. I was contacted by a former colleague, yes, but that was just networking. I pulled out my phone, accessing the email chain that one of my industry contacts had forwarded to me. I have correspondence suggesting otherwise. Titanium identified Harrison Technologies as an acquisition target over a year ago. They researched our structure and identified key personnel who might be sympathetic to an acquisition. They specifically targeted employees who were newer to the company, who might not have deep loyalty to our existing culture. I looked at Jessica, keeping my expression neutral despite the anger I felt at her betrayal. You were recruited, Jessica. Not for your marketing expertise, but for your access and your willingness to advance Titanium's agenda from the inside. The room erupted in murmured conversations. Marcus looked stricken, staring at his wife with an expression of betrayal and confusion. Jessica's face had gone from pale to flushed, anger and embarrassment warring for dominance. That's a serious accusation, Bernard said quietly. Jessica, do you have a response? Jessica stood abruptly. This is character assassination. Margaret has never accepted me in this company. She's resented me from the beginning because I represent change and she can't bear to let go of control. I remained calm, though I felt the sting of her words. This isn't about acceptance or control. It's about protecting what thousands of people have built together. If I'm wrong, if your contacts with Titanium were innocent and these conversations only recently became serious, then you can easily prove that. Show us your correspondence. Let us see the timeline. Jessica grabbed her presentation materials. I don't have to defend myself to people who've already made up their minds. She looked at Marcus. Are you coming? My son sat frozen, clearly torn between his wife and the truth that was emerging. Jessica, he said quietly, just show them the emails. If Mom is wrong, the timeline will prove it. For a moment I thought Jessica might comply. Then her expression hardened. I'm not participating in this witch hunt. She walked to the door, pausing to deliver one final shot. You're all making a terrible mistake. This company is stagnant, and you're too attached to the past to see it. When you're forced to sell in 5 years for half of what Titanium is offering now, remember this moment. She left, the door closing sharply behind her. The conference room fell into uncomfortable silence. Marcus remained in his seat, his head in his hands. Bernard was the first to speak. Well, that was illuminating. I think we can safely table any discussion of mergers with Titanium Solutions. All in favor? Every hand went up except Marcus's. He wasn't opposing, just too shattered to participate. Bernard noticed his abstention but graciously didn't call attention to it. Motion carries unanimously. This board will not pursue acquisition discussions with Titanium Solutions. There's one more matter we need to address, James said carefully. Jessica's continued employment with Harrison Technologies. Given what we've learned about her motivations and outside communications, I don't think we can maintain her in any position where she has access to sensitive strategic information. I'll handle her termination personally, Bernard said. And I'll consult with our legal team about whether her actions constitute breach of employment contract or corporate espionage. Marcus finally looked up. I need to leave. I can't be part of this discussion. Of course, Bernard said gently. Take whatever time you need, Marcus. After my son left, the remaining board members discussed the immediate steps needed to secure sensitive information, assess what Jessica might have already shared with Titanium, and evaluate whether legal action was warranted. I participated in the discussion but felt a growing heaviness. Yes, we had protected the company, but the cost to my family was becoming clear. When the meeting finally adjourned 2 hours later, I remained in the conference room, looking again at that photograph from 1987. Richard and I had been so naive then, thinking that building a successful company was the hard part. We hadn't understood that protecting what you've built could be even harder. Patricia approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. You did what needed to be done, Margaret. I know, but I can't help feeling like I've driven a wedge between my son and his wife. She drove that wedge herself when she decided to betray this company, Patricia said firmly. Marcus will see that eventually. Give him time. James joined us, his expression troubled. I'm going to have to fire approximately a dozen people who Jessica brought into the company. Background checks are revealing that several of them have connections to Titanium. She'd been building a network of sympathetic insiders for months. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. How did we miss it? Because we trusted, James said simply. We've built a culture based on trust and someone weaponized that against us. I looked at both of them, these people who had dedicated their careers to Harrison Technologies, who believed in what we were building. We can't let this make us cynical. We can't let Jessica's betrayal change who we are as a company. Agreed, Patricia said. But we can be smarter about our hiring and vetting processes going forward. As I drove home that evening, I called Marcus 3 times. Each call went to voicemail. I left messages trying to convey support without judgment, but I didn't know if he was listening or if Jessica had convinced him that I was the villain in this story. When I arrived home, I found him sitting on my front porch, still in his business suit, looking exhausted and lost. I didn't know where else to go, he said as I approached. Come inside. I'll make coffee. We sat in the kitchen where we had talked so many times before, but this silence was different, heavier with betrayal and broken illusions. She's been lying to me from the beginning, Marcus said finally. I called the doorman at our building. We've been living there for 18 months, not 2. She told me it was a recent move because she didn't want you to know we could afford that apartment. She said you judge us for being financially irresponsible. I stayed quiet, letting him process. And the thing she said about you, about the company, I believed her because she seemed so confident, so certain. She made me feel like you were holding me back, like your old-fashioned values were preventing me from achieving my potential. He looked at me with eyes that reminded me of the little boy who used to come to me with his problems. How could I have been so blind? I reached across the table and took his hand. Because she's very good at manipulation. Because you loved her and wanted to believe the best of her. Because she told you things you wanted to hear about your own importance and potential. I feel like such a fool. You're not a fool. You're someone who trusted the wrong person. We've all done that. He was quiet for a long moment. What do I do now? That's something only you can decide. But whatever you choose, know that you're my son and I love you. Nothing Jessica has done changes that. Marcus stayed for dinner and we talked late into the night about everything, his marriage, his career, his understanding of what Harrison Technologies meant and what it should become. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had, painful but necessary. Around midnight he finally left, promising to call the next day. I watched him drive away, hoping that he would find his way through this crisis and emerge stronger. But even as I closed the door, I knew this wasn't over. Jessica had been publicly humiliated and lost her position. People like her didn't accept defeat quietly. The board meeting had been a victory, but I suspected it was only the first battle in a longer war. I returned to Richard's study, pouring another small glass of scotch, and began preparing for whatever Jessica's next move might be. Because if I had learned anything in 40 years of building and protecting Harrison Technologies, it was that you never assumed the fight was finished until your opponent had no moves left. And Jessica still had plenty of moves available. 3 months after the board meeting, I received an unexpected call from Bernard Whitmore. "Margaret, you need to see something. Can you meet me at the office this afternoon?" His tone carried an urgency that brought me in immediately. When I arrived, I found him in the conference room with James and our corporate attorney Michael Ross. Spread across the table were documents that made my blood run cold. "Jessica filed a lawsuit this morning," Michael explained. "She's claiming wrongful termination, defamation, and gender discrimination. She's seeking $15 million in damages plus reinstatement." I picked up the complaint, scanning the allegations. According to her filing, I had orchestrated a campaign to destroy her reputation because I felt threatened by a younger, more innovative woman. The board meeting was characterized as an ambush designed to humiliate her. Her communications with Titanium were portrayed as legitimate industry networking that I had twisted into something sinister. "This is entirely fabricated," I said, though my hands trembled slightly holding the papers. "We know that," Bernard assured me. "But she's retained Fletcher and Associates. They're aggressive litigators who specialize in high-profile employment cases. This is going to be expensive and public." Over the following weeks, the lawsuit dominated my life. Jessica had clearly planned her strategy carefully. She gave interviews to business publications painting herself as a whistleblower who had tried to save a failing company from its outdated leadership. She appeared on a podcast discussing ageism in corporate America, positioning herself as a victim of my inability to accept changing times. The most painful aspect was watching Marcus struggle with divided loyalties. He had moved out of the penthouse apartment, staying with friends while he processed everything, but Jessica was still his wife. She called him constantly, alternating between tearful appeals and angry accusations. I could see him being slowly pulled back into her orbit despite everything he had learned. Then Patricia made a discovery that changed everything. "Margaret, you need to see this immediately." She arrived at my house one evening with her laptop, her expression a mixture of triumph and disgust. She opened a file containing emails between Jessica and a Titanium Solutions executive named Richard Vance. The correspondence went back 14 months, long before Jessica had even met Marcus. The emails detailed a deliberate strategy to infiltrate Harrison Technologies, identify vulnerabilities, and build internal support for an acquisition. One email made me feel physically ill. "Target the son. He's ambitious but insecure about living in his parents' shadow. A relationship would provide perfect access and leverage. Classic honeypot strategy." She targeted Marcus deliberately, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The entire relationship was a strategic move. Patricia nodded grimly. "And there's more. Titanium promised her a senior executive position after the acquisition. She would have made millions from the deal. This was never about improving Harrison Technologies. It was about cashing out." I immediately called Michael Ross. "These emails are our defense. They prove everything." But Michael's response was cautious. "They're explosive, yes. But we need to verify they're authentic and that we obtained them legally." "How did Patricia get access to them?" Patricia explained that a Titanium employee, troubled by the company's tactics, had anonymously leaked the files to an industry journalist who shared them with her. The chain of custody was problematic from a legal standpoint, but the content was devastating to Jessica's case. The turning point came when Marcus showed up at my door late one night, his face ravaged by tears. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice breaking. He pulled out his phone and showed me text messages from Jessica that had come through that evening. Since he wasn't responding to her calls, she had apparently decided to try a different approach. The messages were vicious, calling him weak and pathetic, saying she had wasted months playing the devoted wife to an insignificant man, threatening to destroy his reputation along with mine if he didn't support her lawsuit. I read through them, my heart breaking for my son. "I'm so sorry, Marcus." He collapsed into a chair, covering his face with his hands. I loved her. I actually loved her, and I was just a target. Just a means to an end. I sat beside him, putting my arm around his shoulders as he wept. For the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't holding back, wasn't trying to maintain composure or dignity. He was simply a wounded person confronting a devastating betrayal. The next morning, Marcus met with Michael Ross and provided a sworn statement detailing Jessica's manipulation, the timeline of their relationship, and the text messages. He also agreed to testify if the case went to trial. Armed with Patricia's emails and Marcus's testimony, Michael approached Jessica's attorneys with a counterproposal. Drop the lawsuit and sign a confidentiality agreement, or we file our own lawsuit for corporate espionage, fraud, and intentional interference with business relationships. We'll also share these emails with the business press. Jessica's attorneys requested a meeting. When we gathered in a neutral conference room downtown, Jessica looked different from the polished professional I had confronted months earlier. She was thinner, harder, her confidence replaced by calculation. The settlement took 6 hours to negotiate. Jessica would withdraw her lawsuit with prejudice, meaning she could never refile. She would sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement preventing her from discussing Harrison Technologies or her employment there. She would return all company property and documents. In exchange, we would not pursue criminal charges or our own civil action, and we would provide a neutral employment reference that confirmed dates of employment without commentary. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Jessica signed the documents with mechanical efficiency, her expression blank. As she prepared to leave, she looked at Marcus one final time. You could have been so much more than you are. He met her gaze steadily. I already am more than you'll ever understand. After she left, Michael began collecting the signed documents. This is over. She can't touch you or the company now. But I knew it wasn't really over. The damage Jessica had inflicted went beyond legal threats or financial concerns. She had exposed vulnerabilities in how we vetted employees and protected sensitive information. She had demonstrated that our culture of trust could be weaponized by someone sufficiently ruthless. She had nearly destroyed my relationship with my son. Over the following months, we implemented changes at Harrison Technologies. Enhanced background checks, stricter protocols for information access, regular security audits. James instituted a formal ethics training program. Patricia developed better systems for monitoring unusual information requests or suspicious patterns of behavior. But we were careful not to let those changes erode the fundamental culture Richard and I had built. We didn't become paranoid or suspicious. We simply became more thoughtful about protecting what mattered. Marcus filed for divorce and eventually emerged from the experience with unexpected strength. He had confronted his own insecurities and emerged with clearer understanding of his values and identity. He became more active on the board, contributing thoughtful perspectives that balanced respect for the company's heritage with genuine openness to necessary evolution. 6 months after the settlement, I was working in my garden when Marcus arrived unannounced. He looked peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since before he met Jessica. I wanted to tell you something, he said as we sat on the patio with iced tea. I've been offered a CEO position at a tech startup. It's small, risky, but exciting, and I think I'm going to take it. I felt a flash of surprise followed by understanding. You want to build something of your own? He nodded. I've spent my whole life in the shadow of Harrison Technologies, either trying to live up to it or feeling crushed by it. I need to discover what I can create independently. I smiled, remembering the young couple in that 1987 photograph, taking a leap into the unknown. I think that's exactly what you should do. A year after Jessica's lawsuit was settled, Harrison Technologies announced record profits. Our employee retention rate improved even further. We opened a new research facility that would develop the next generation of innovations. James Chun received recognition as one of the industry's most effective CEOs. I gradually reduced my active involvement, secure that the company was in capable hands and protected by people who understood what made it valuable. I started consulting with other family businesses navigating succession challenges, sharing the hard-won wisdom of protecting legacy while enabling growth. One afternoon, I received a call from a journalist writing a book about corporate espionage. She had heard about Jessica's attempt to facilitate a hostile acquisition and wanted to interview me. I declined, honoring the confidentiality agreement. But I thought about what I might have said if I could have spoken freely. I would have told her that the greatest protection against betrayal isn't sophisticated security systems or airtight contracts. It's building something worth protecting, creating a culture so strong that people choose to defend it. Jessica had seen Harrison Technologies as a transaction, a target, an opportunity for personal gain. She had failed because she fundamentally misunderstood what she was attacking. She thought she was dealing with a company that could be reduced to balance sheets and acquisition multiples. She never understood that she was challenging a community, a shared commitment, a living legacy that thousands of people had invested their lives in building. On what would have been Richard's 75th birthday, I visited his grave with flowers and a bottle of his favorite scotch. I told him about everything that had happened, about Jessica's betrayal and the fight to protect what we had built together. I told him about Marcus finding his own path. I told him that Harrison Technologies was thriving, true to the values we had established 4 decades ago. And I thanked him for teaching me that building something meaningful required not just vision and hard work, but also the courage to fight for what mattered when it was threatened. Jessica had assumed she was dealing with a retired grandmother who would step aside gracefully when challenged by someone younger and more ambitious. She had been wrong about that, just as she had been wrong about everything else. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.